Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. I'm pleased to be joined by Karendeep Badwal, who is a regulatory expert. And this should be a really informative discussion. How are you today, Karendeep?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you today?
Excellent, excellent. And you're calling in from the UK, right?
That's correct.
And I can see a lot of sun coming through, so it must be the seasons must be
Mm.
changing.
We don't know what that is in the UK. We're getting quite used to it.
That's cool. So let's jump into the interview here. So maybe just start by telling us about yourself, your journey in healthcare AI and the medical device regulatory space.
Sure. So I'm Karendeep, and I'm founder of QRA Medical, a quality and regulatory consulting firm. In terms of my educational background, it was actually within pharmaceuticals, but it just so happened that the first job I had out of college was at a medical devices OEM. So basically, they were a company where you go to them and they act as a manufacturing house for you for companies that don't want to do manufacturing in-house. And then that was my exposure to medical devices. It's basically, and I realized how diverse it is in comparison to pharmaceuticals,
Right,
things like
sure.
pacemakers, defibrillators, contact lenses, wearables, watches, software.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, it's not really a space that you can get bored in. There's plenty of different types of products that you can work with.
Right.
And so my traditional career started basically working with things like St. Jude Medical, Abbott, pacemakers, defibrillators, class three, effectively. And then over the past sort of 3 to 4 years, I'm doing a lot more in the software, AI, medical
Hmm.
device space.
Mm-hmm.
Two reasons. Number one is that's where the market's moving.
Yep.
And then number two, believe it or not, but there's a lot of companies out there who are health companies, and just by the claims that they're making, they're falling under that medical device space. So there's a lot of companies that are now basically knocking on my door saying to me, "Hey, Kennedy, we didn't realize we're a medical device.
Right.
What do we do to get regulated?"
Right. Yeah, be careful what you ask for, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So again, I think this is really fascinating. So in that, where do you see the biggest regulatory challenges that these, again, emerging medical AI, software companies face?
The issue with technology and the way that it's moving is basically regulatory in comparison is very slow. If we go back to the old medical device directive that we had in the EU, which is now currently also the UK MDR, is written in 1993, and the idea of a software was maybe something that was embedded on a medical device or a machine. Hence
Mm,
why a lot of these software fell under class one, self-certified. When the EU MDR came along, a lot of these devices basically became a class 2A, which meant that you need a full notified body audit, full quality management system, technical files, etc. So I think what's happening here is the regulation recognizes software, but there's no real regulation in place in terms of how it works, in terms of how things are. And I know with the EU, eventually we're going to have the EU AI Act coming in, which is of course going to start regulating some of these things. And under the EU AI Act, basically any software, medical device, AI, etc., would automatically fall under the high risk category.
mm,
So I think what's happening here is the regulations are still based on your traditional physical medical devices, which let's face it, is majority of the market.
yep.
But it doesn't really talk in detail in terms of software. How far do you take your cybersecurity? How far do you have to do certain types of testing? How do you deal with things like false positives, false negatives? How exactly is the AI working? So this is another one with companies as well. It's kind of, okay, great, you're using AI, but what is the AI doing? What's the
Right.
specific purpose of the AI? But the beauty of what I'm going to say with people out there right now who are seeing Hollywood movies and thinking, no, AI is taking over.
Yeah.
The beauty of the regulation is this: it still requires a physician decision. So
Right.
if the physician is there, they're still going to be the one making the decisions. The AI at this moment in time is basically merely an assistance tool. I think personally, we're decades away where the AI is going to be doing everything for you. We're still going to have the human element.
What about, so obviously, you mentioned the EU several times, but you do work in the US as well, right, Karendeep?
That's correct, yeah.
And so what are some of the differences that you see?
So what I actually like with the FDA is they're really good when it comes to things like cybersecurity. If you go onto the FDA website, there's tons of guidance documents in terms of what they're looking for, a software level of concern, what the kind of things are, machine learning, good manufacturing practice, etc. All of these different things. The FDA is quite good at that. The beauty of the FDA as well, for those who are maybe not familiar with regulatory, is if you want to get a CE mark in Europe and basically a European approval, you work with what's known as notified bodies. So these are third-party businesses that come and audit you
Mm,
and that sort of thing. When it comes to the US, that doesn't exist. You go direct to the FDA, so you're dealing directly with the government. The beauty of that is you can have what's known as pre-submissions. You can have conversations with the FDA and say, hey, look, this is a product we're looking to bring onto the market. This is what we're going to do. What do you guys think about this? That
nice.
doesn't really exist in the EU. I mean, you can speak to consultants like me, but we're not the regulators. We're not the ones
Yep.
approving you. The beauty of the US is you are speaking directly to the guys that are actually approving you. Those are the ones that are going to be assessing you. So I think the key difference here is with the US, if you're unsure about anything, You can speak directly with the regulators, whereas
Wow.
in the EU, that doesn't really exist.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Wow, that's really good insight. So from a founder's perspective, what are some of the things they should be thinking about? I mean, obviously regulatory is crucial, but maybe what are some of the mistakes that you commonly see, and what are some ways that founders need to be thinking about not to make those types of mistakes?
Leaving regulatory too late. I may sound very biased when I say this with my background, but again, it's you can't do regulatory in retrospective. And this is an example that I can give. And this is the key mistake a lot of companies make is I'm going to sound very offensive by saying this, but they don't know what the device is.
Right.
And people get offended when I say that. But then what I say is this. What's your intended use? What are your contraindications? What's your intended patient population? Which parts of the world do you want to go in? What claims do you want to make? Until you've got the answers to that question, your clinical, your regulatory is never going to be fully in place. So basically, what I call the intended use statement is basically like the backbone of your company. Everything you do going forward is going to be based on that, your clinical studies, your regulatory. Until you've got that document in place, you're not really going to have a roadmap in terms of where you want to go with the company. So that's number one mistake is not having an intended use. Number two is underestimating the cost and resources
Mm,
involved.
mm,
They'll have four guys in marketing, which is great, going to conferences, raising funds, etc.
yeah,
And they'll just have one person in regulatory, like, hey, get us that 510K or get us that CE mark, and great, we're on the market. It should be the other way around. You should have four guys in regulatory
right.
and one in marketing because you can do all the marketing in the world. But if you don't have regulatory, you're never going to be able to legally be able to sell. And that's what companies are doing. And also, they don't realize regulatory is a living process. Not, okay, we got the approval. That's it. You're going to have annual inspections. There can be quality management systems. There's going to be CAPAs. There can be all these different things going on that companies fail to realize. So again, with founders, by all means, I understand you're bootstrapped. I understand there's budgeting issues as well. But when it comes to regulatory, that's not one place you should be cheaping out on. I think that's one big mistake a lot of these founders are doing. And I find it's the founders that are new to the medtech space, not the
Yeah.
ones that have been there before. If you're a founder who's basically worked in this space before, investors worked in this space, they understand the timelines. They understand these things don't take months, they take years.
Yeah.
These things don't cost a few $1,000s, they can potentially go into the millions. So people that are veterans in this industry, they very much get it. But if you got somebody who's maybe worked in consumer electronics before and they can sell their product within a week, and you bring them into medtech, they just can't wrap their head around that this thing can take quite long.
Yeah, it's interesting what I see because I do a number of these interviews. You have sort of a couple of different flavors of healthcare AI founders. You have MDs, right, who whatever they have a problem that they've recognized and they see the potential of AI and whatever they have some means to invest in a solution and they take a shot at it, right? But again, like it's oftentimes it's their first foray into actual being in business for themselves. And then you have software engineers that may be like Silicon Valley types, and they just whatever have a hunch, right? Okay, like there's a big opportunity here. Maybe they're driven by the promise of VC types of riches and that sort of thing. But again, like maybe they've come from enterprise software and now they're coming into med tech, and again, it's just interesting to see how these starts to converge, and but kind of where the gaps are as well. So
Yeah,
what
very much
about
so. I mean, there's definitely different profiles in terms of what people are and what they do. But yeah, definitely, like I was saying, it's usually the first time founders that have this issue.
right, right. So and again, just another thing that we're seeing now, again, with the funding environment tightening and the need to really preserve, use your money wisely, right? And sometimes preserve cash. So again, I've had a number of discussions about people moving from, say, fixed resources to variable. Talk to me about you as a consultant, and like maybe what are the pros and cons of a founder using a consultant versus bringing on full-time resources? What's sort of like the right situation, I guess, to consider, I guess the right size, the right type of resource for the job.
My view here, what works best is a hybrid system, is a mix of consultants and full-time people within your company. So somebody like me as a consultant come in and advise you, but I can't always do the heavy lifting. I'm not going to be with you 40, 50 hours a week doing the work with you. I can tell you where to go. You need somebody in the company to be able to do that heavy lifting internally. So that's basically my view here is you need to have hybrid systems in place. So by all means, have a consultant like me, but you need to have someone internally in the company. Sometimes I've had clients in the past where they expect me as a consultant to get on with the work, but then I can only commit X amount of hours per week. So I think that's where the limitations are with the consultant, is they only have so much time available. So you definitely need someone in-house in the company, but also maintenance as well. So I can help you build that quality management system. But you as a company are the one that's going to be using it, going to be having to develop it, etc. I can come in and guide you. So that's the way consultants need to be seen. See them as guiders or advisors, but you still need people within the company to actually go out and do the work. And not just that as well. I'm not always going to be available for this project. So again, I might know your product inside out. I know your technical files. But if I move on to another project, I'm no longer available. What are you going to do when the regulatory bodies are asking you questions or you need to make changes? So it's important that you have somebody in the company that understands that whole regulatory process, understands why certain changes were made, why design changes were made, how you got from version 1 to version 5. Because I've seen that with companies before. I'll be like, okay, great. What variants are you on in terms of your products? Like, great, we're on version 10. Okay, what happened from version 1 to version 9 is like, sorry, the last person left. There's no design history file. No one knows what's going on. Oh, sorry, a previous consultancy did that. So it's always important that you have someone in the company that understands that progression stage, why certain changes were made, what features were added, etc.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. What about in terms of, because another comment that I've heard several times actually when I've interviewed CEOs for this series is that, you know, they sometimes feel that they've hired the wrong consultant. So maybe what are some questions that they should be asking, whatever people, consultants, just to help them make sure that they're choosing the right person for the job?
So the best analogy I can give is for that one is kind of like, is this the right consultant for you? So for example, I was having some work done to my house and somebody said to me, there's no such thing as good builders or bad builders. You need to find the right one for you. Do you want someone who's there on site from 9 to 5 every single day, or do you want someone to come in every so often? Do you want someone who's local to your office, or do you want someone who's based far away? Do you want someone who's used to working with SMEs, or do you want someone working with large companies? So I don't necessarily think it's a case of a lot of companies just hire a consultant, but is it the right consultant for you? Do you want someone to be hands-on? Do you want someone at the back? Do you want an advisor or do you want a doer? So these are the questions that you need to ask yourself as an individual, as a company. What is the good role of that consultant going to be? And then find the consultant that's based around that space. And then number two, again, do you want a consultant or do you want a consultancy? There's a
Mm,
big difference here.
mm,
If you
mm.
hire an individual like me, I'll be a bit more hands-on. If you hire a consultancy, on the other hand, they may have me working 1 week, they may have somebody else working, they might have somebody from another working. So you constantly got these different people that you're working with. Now, the beauty of a consultancy is if XYZ consultant like myself is not available, they can potentially have someone else in there.
Yeah.
But then the downside of that, of course, you're potentially working with different people at different times rather than the same person in each stage. So again, the questions a company needs to be asking is, what is that consultant going to be doing? What is the gap that they're going to be filling? And then you hire the right consultant for you in terms of how you want to work.
Yeah, what's interesting, again, you see this a lot happening now, is the sort of evolution of fractional roles. So, for example, fractional, a commercial leader, fractional chief marketing officer. Are you seeing that on the regulatory side, Karendeep? Are there sort of quote fractional roles? Sort of, is that something that is prevalent or accepted or emerging?
Not on a full-time basis. So again, by all means, when it comes to consultancy, there'll be fraction consultancy. So for example, some companies will have me on a retainer, I'll be 10 hours a month, and then I just come in as and when I need to. Some companies might be have for X hours a week or something, or it might be just a project where it's like 200 hours over the space of 6 months. So on a full-time basis or even a part-time, that doesn't really exist. I know you have fractional CFOs or fractional CEOs, etc., but not necessarily on the regulatory piece. It's not something that I'm seeing quite often in this industry. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't happen, but I think the fractional approach is quite good, particularly if you're a bootstrap company of, let's just say, two people. The last thing you want to be doing is hiring a head of regulatory affairs for over $100,000 a year. It's basically money down the drain.
Yeah.
But then if you just want someone for maybe 1 day a week or 2 day a week, just to sort of keep it going, that's the more sensible option. So I think fractional approach when it comes to regulatory is definitely one there. But I think that should always be somebody in the company that is basically handling the regulatory, even if they're not doing the submissions, just staying on top of things like post-market surveillance, the quality management system. There needs to be somebody in the company that just stays on top of things.
What about, again, kind of going back to AI and how AI is being regulated? What are maybe the two or three things that every sort of emerging AI med tech company really needs to be aware of as it pertains to AI and regulatory?
Definitely. So AI is referred to a black box. Information
Yeah.
comes in and something comes out. Know what's happening within that black box. That's what companies are doing. What exactly is that algorithm doing? And this is what I say with AI. Know the failure modes of your AI because AI is very, very good at what it does, but put it in a situation where it's unfamiliar and the thing will just completely fall apart. So make sure you know what your AI is basically doing. If you're going to employ things like machine learning, as in the AI is learning, etc., that's fine. But when it comes to the regulatory aspect, you can't really have that. So generally, when it comes to the regulatory piece, is you have an iterative approach. So you can have the AI learning by all means. But the moment you want to start adding features or changing the algorithm, that basically requires some form of submission. It may not be a full submission, it may be a partial submission or a substantial change. So that's something you need to look into. And then, of course, the regulators at this moment in time are very much looking into AI. So by all means, you're going to start seeing regulations as well. And this is a top tip for anyone. If the FDA releases a guidance document, follow the thing. If a regulator is telling you how to do something and how they want it presented, you better follow that piece of documentation because they haven't just, because I've had this with companies before. They're a bit like, oh, but this is just an advice document. Like, yeah, but it's written by the regulators. These are the guys assessing you. They've told you how they want the information presented. So you need to follow that. So my view here is outside of regulations, look into guidance documents, whether it's in Europe with the MDCG, IMDRF, whether the FDA, etc. Keep an eye on all the guidance documents and make sure that you're updating iteratively, basically, within your own company.
Excellent, excellent. Well, this has been a really extremely informative interview, Karendeep. So thanks for sharing everything. Just maybe like just one last question. Again, you probably mentioned this a few times, but just kind of in summary, what are maybe the two or three pieces of advice, maybe something a little bit counterintuitive that you'd offer CEOs of these emerging or founders of these emerging healthcare AI companies?
Number one is whatever you think your budget is or time, double it.
Right.
So you've got a bit of leeway there, and it may go there. Number two, of course, is bring in regulatory, intended use, clinical, etc., right in the early stages. And then number three, understand that this is a long road. There's going to be tons of bumps on the way. You're going to break down. There's going to be punctures, etc. But if you keep at it and you really believe in your device and you really think that it's going to make it, you will get there in the end. A lot of companies give up quite early on, but if you keep fighting and you really believe in your product, you will get there in the end.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karendeep. Congratulations on all your success and the expertise that you've developed, and just wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you very much.